Hello YouTube. My name is Isabella. Today I'm going to be introducing a new series of videos on my channel, and that is none other than audiobook reviews. I think audiobooks are an incredibly valuable medium for so many reasons and so many different types of people. I find audiobooks can sometimes hinder or add something to the experience of reading a story. So I think it's worth talking about, reviewing. I had a very specific experience that sort of inspired me to start doing these videos, and that was with The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. I just finished this maybe a week ago, and I initially listened to the first half via audiobook, and I really wasn't liking the narrator, and I was so upset because this book seems like a book that is so well suited to audio. Then the second I switched from the audiobook to the physical book, I was loving this book so much, but the first half definitely affected my enjoyment of it, and I don't know what to rate it still. I've just kind of left it sitting there on my Goodreads shelf going like, I don't know if I'm going to give this a 4-star, a 5-star. The audiobook definitely hindered my experience, and I want to talk about the experience of all my audiobook reading. So there's no way I would ever be able to review all the audiobooks I've listened to because I have a memory like a sieve. But what I figured is I could go back and at least review all the ones that I listened to in 2020. This first video will be the first half of my 2020 listening. I think I listened to 21, 22 total audiobooks in 2020. So I'll do the first 11 and then follow up in a few weeks with the next set. And then going forward, I'm hoping to, I don't know how many audiobooks I'll fill in, but I'll be able to discuss at length and detail with the books that I DNF via audio. I do that pretty often, but because I don't write it down or I don't really make a mental note of it, that those things are just kind of lost in my brain and memory. And I would like in the future to say why the audiobook specifically wasn't working for me and why I ended up choosing and switching the format. I think that's enough housekeeping. I'm almost done. The way these two videos are going to work, I don't know about like the more recent things when I start wrapping them up, if I'll have like a proper rating system. But for the 2020 audiobooks, I'm just going to say if I recommend them, if I do not, or if I super recommend them and say that they like add to the experience of listening. I actually went back and listened to all of the audiobooks, like the samples that they have on Audible. And it's funny because you spend so much time listening to a specific voice telling you a story, it actually kind of came back. And I remembered a lot of what I thought during my actual reading experience, which is pretty cool. But I'm going to tell you the book, obviously, the narrator, whether or not I recommend it, and where I listened to it. The first book I listened to in 2020 took me basically the whole time because it is a long audiobook, and that is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This is narrated by Susie Bernice, and I listened to it via Hoopla. I will leave a flash of the picture of the audiobook on the screen because this is a classic and there are many editions. The version I listened to, I actually really enjoyed. I thought our narrator did a really good job. They did distinct voices for all of the 4 little women. I was also super impressed because this had the ability to be super dry. It's a classic. The language is a little bit antiquated or a little bit different. I think it reads a lot more modern than I expected, but then again, I didn't exactly know the era of the book when I was going into it. It is a very long audiobook, so if that's not something that's your jam, maybe just keep an eye on that. But overall, I do recommend listening to it. The next audiobook I listened to was Allegedly by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is narrated by Bonnie Turpin, and I listened to it via Hoopla. You'll notice that in this first video, basically everything I listened to was with Hoopla because at that point in time, I thought that was the only audiobook service available to me through my library because there was a whole traumatic incident with my library no longer using Libby, and it was a very upsetting experience, but more on that later. Bonnie Turpin might be my favorite narrator so far that I have discovered. Everything she narrates I love. I love her characterization. I love how she personifies all these characters, and allegedly is no different. And I think this book actually is very well suited to audiobook. Overall, I didn't love this book, but I didn't have my expectations really tempered in the right way. This is sort of a mystery thing, and I thought it was just like a straight up contemporary, but Bonnie Turpin definitely does a good job. I really like the way she brings the main character Mary to life. I think this added to my experience. I do recommend this audiobook a lot. I think it brings a lot to it. I then went and listened to Girls Burn Brighter by Shobha Rao. This is narrated by Sunila Nankani, and I listened to it again via Hoopla. I have had an interesting experience with this narrator. I've had books that I've liked narrated by them a lot, but then there have also been a book or two that I have not liked their narration. This one, there were no like real extreme thoughts either way, so overall I was fine with it. I do recommend it. It didn't detract from the experience, but I do want to issue a little bit of caution. This has a lot of very triggering subject matter material in here that is discussed, and the added element for me listening to it was really, really tough, and there were some times where I was like kind of upset and put off. I think the performance is fine. There are no real distinct thoughts on there, but maybe just a bit of caution if that's something that could bother you. The next audiobook I have to talk about is Mirage by Somaya Diode, and this is narrated by Rasha Zemamiri. Also listen to this via Hoopla, and I absolutely 100% recommend reading this via audiobook. I think this really benefited from having a narrator, and an excellent narrator at that. I think the narration itself, it feels like a performance. It's not something that's just like phoned in or monotonous in any way. This feels like a performance, and I felt like the narrator really sold me on the characters and what they were going through, and like our main character's plight in here. I think the writing itself also really lends to being narrated. It feels a little poetic and a little bit like spoken word at times. Not that this is told in verse, but I really, really like sort of the flow of the story. There are a lot of highs and lows with the performance. Overall, I just really loved it. And they're also at the end of the audiobook, I remember getting so confused because there was like an hour left, and I was like, wait, but like the book's ending, what is this? And it's actually an interview with the author. She basically talks about where she drew inspiration from, how she infused her Moroccan culture with this sci-fi fantasy blend, and it was really interesting, and the added context made me enjoy the story even more. So yeah, this story is definitely a very well performed audiobook. I really, really liked it. I then listened to The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, and this is narrated by Dylan Moore. This I listened to on my library's other app. It's called Cloud Library. Honestly, I've never heard of another booktuber if they've ever mentioned that their library uses this app. It's kind of a really frustrating app, but I will never complain because it's another resource for me. However, unfortunately, I don't recommend this pick via audio for a couple of reasons. I, for the most part, wasn't really impressed with the narrator's narration. I think also this book maybe doesn't entirely lend itself to audiobooks, or there was room for it to not work because it's a very non-linear timeline. There are a ton of characters and a ton of different plot points throughout the story. So personally, I found it a little difficult to keep track of what was going on. There's also a little bit of a surrealist element. I just didn't quite pick up on that, I think, the way I should have. But the audiobook, I didn't love the narration. It was monotonous. And then I also saw reviews on Audible that there were a couple mispronounced words, which isn't like the end of the world, but also there are some really bad accents in here. Now, I don't remember that, but there were multiple people who made note of that. So take that with what you will. I'm excited to talk about this next one. I listened to The Deep by Rivers Solomon and a bunch of other creators whose names I'm currently forgetting. This is also narrated by Daveed Diggs. He plays Jefferson in the musical Hamilton, and I love him already. I think he's such a charismatic presence, and listening to him read this I thought was such a lovely experience. It's a very tough book and also has some triggering topics discussed, but there's a lot of elements of like sort of oral storytelling, which I thought was a really nice touch to listen to it as an audiobook. I also just personally love Daveed Diggs' voice. I think this book definitely benefits from the audiobook being listened to. If you were interested, I truly recommend this audiobook wholeheartedly. It added to my experience. I also don't own this book and would like to change that because I love it. Okay, we're getting there. I'm really curious to see how long I've been recording for. I didn't intend for these videos to be super long, but we'll see. I also listened to Want by Cindy Pon. This is narrated by Roger Ye. Listened to it on my cloud library, and I also don't really recommend this audiobook. I have unhauled this book. I didn't enjoy the book itself, but I found the narrator to be a little monotonous, a little lifeless in the performance. I also was not a fan of how the narrator did feminine voices. I believe in the sequel they changed that and there is a female narrator as well, but I don't plan on continuing with the series regardless. This is one of the cases where I think the audiobook itself maybe actually did affect my enjoyment and I could have liked it more when reading it, because when I was reading it I didn't think the book itself was terrible, but there's nothing really driving me to get through it, and I kind of felt obligated to finish the audiobook, and it just wasn't a great experience. I ended up giving the whole book overall 2 stars. The next 2 books I'm going to talk about in conjunction because they're a part of the same series and they have the same narrator. They also happen to be my favorite series of all time. And what I'm about to say might make me sound a little nutty, but I hope you understand what I'm getting at. And I'm talking about The City of Brass and The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. This is also narrated by Sunila Nankani, who narrated Girls Burn Brighter. And I have some mixed thoughts on the narration as a whole. I actually listened to them via Audible. I, at one point in time, had an Audible subscription. In the future, now that I've completed a couple series in audiobook form on Audible, I will turn to Libro FM. That's the service I'm excited to try, but I haven't particularly felt the need to own another audiobook in recent memory. I don't recommend these books over audio, especially during your first listen. I think if you're already familiar with the story and you want to reread them, go ahead, they're fine. I think the performance in here is great. I do like the way the narrator personifies the main character, Nahri. I like the voices that she uses for those main characters. But this is an incredibly political fantasy, and when I was reading them, just physically reading the first book the first time, I found it a little bit difficult to keep track of all the things going on. So I think listening to it the first time might be very, very difficult. I have seen a couple of native Arabic speakers, and the person who comes to mind is Fadwa from Word Wonders. They specifically mentioned in their review that the Arabic is absolutely butchered in here. So overall, I don't recommend you listen to them, especially on first go. I do listen to the audiobooks when I want something comforting, but it's not I think the experience is really benefited from it. I just usually can't justify sitting and rereading really chunky books again and again and again, We're almost done. I have 3 more. I listened to You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson, and this is narrated by Alaska Jackson. Listen to it via Hoopla. I liked the performance enough. It's nothing that really sticks out to me, so it wasn't a fault either way. It wasn't like a plus or a negative. It just kind of exists. I thought it was perfectly serviceable and fine. I did like the fact that this audiobook is really short and it's a lighthearted, cute contemporary, so I could jump in and out. Contemporaries tend to be decently well suited to audio because there's not as much to concentrate on, but overall, yeah, it's fine. I do recommend it. It's just nothing, it wasn't like anything incredibly special. I own this next book. I just couldn't find it and couldn't be bothered to like search on my shelves, but that is The Last Name Sara by Kristen Cicerelli. The narrator is Pearl Mackey. I forgot to write down where I listened to it. I think I listened to it again with Hoopla. And I actually really enjoyed this audiobook, but I think it's going to be incredibly subjective. The narrator sort of puts on a lilt or accent throughout the whole story, and it's really going to be up to you whether or not you like this accent that they apply to the story as a whole. This is a fantasy series like based in an entirely different world, and I thought that actually really added to my experience. It made it feel like something fresh and new. It brought a lot of life to the writing and the characters, and I really had a good experience with this book. The only thing that makes me really, really sad is that this is a series of companion novels, and they are narrated by different narrators throughout the whole series, and I'm really upset because I loved the narration in here. I do personally really recommend it. It really added to my experience. The final book I listened to for the first half is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is narrated by Lisa Flanahan. I listened to this on my Cloud Library app, and I loved the narration. I remember, I went back and looked at my wrap up, and apparently I loved it so much that I felt the need to mention it there. But I don't actually remember the experience listening to it at all, because August was a really, really rough time for me. I was in and out of the hospital, but apparently I really latched on to this audiobook, the narration. I went back, listened to the sample again, and liked it, but something about it really worked for me at the time. This is a very atmospheric story, and it's very wintry and cold, and I think the narrator did a really good job creating that sort of atmosphere. From what I can remember, August I've really, really put out of my mind entirely because it was difficult. Kind of a crappy book to end it on, because most of the things I have a lot of really distinct opinions on, but this one my brain has decided to yeet out of there, but I did really like it. So those are all my audio opinions on the first chunk of books I read in 2020. I think I did all my housekeeping at the beginning of the video. There's nothing really that I've remembered that I have to add on, but I'm really passionate about audiobooks. I love them. They're amazing for accessibility, for multitasking, but they also have the ability to ruin a story. Sounds dramatic, but hey, things sometimes are poorly narrated. This is by no means a new concept. I remember quite a few years ago, Trina from Between Chapters, she used to do dedicated audiobook reviews. She was the OG one that I knew of that was always talking about audiobooks in their performances. So I'm not reinventing the wheel here, but I just wanted to make a space specifically where I talk about audiobooks and my opinions on them, because they can affect your enjoyment. Let me know down in the comments below if you have any specific audiobook recommendations for me, if you think there is a book that is enhanced by the audiobook experience, and if you want to explain why, I would super love to know that. I think it's fascinating. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.